Rain Man is back with Little Miss Sunshine. I never know how to start these shows, man. I don't want to just start every time by saying the show goes on, saga continues. I'm never really sure, so I got to get a little bit more creative with my intros. But welcome into the 42nd episode of Chris and Company. We've reached a Jackie Robinson's number of episodes as we are now just over a year into this show, which I appreciate people's continued support. Today we will have Jeff Rieger, a guy that I've known for a long time. Interviewed him, I mean, we're talking like 2017 when I was just doing like an independent baseball podcast when I was at Central Michigan. So known the guy for a long time. One of the nicer guys in media. Looking forward to talking to him about Tiger baseball, Michigan basketball, Michigan football, and just kind of taking a trip down memory lane. I thought that we had really good success with the Stoney interview. And so I hope that this is kind of in the same vein. And Rieger's, I've met the guy in person before. He's a great conversationalist, very super nice guy. So really looking forward to that. Before we get to the interview, though, let's get some programming notes out of the way. Look, if you want to listen to this show, you can find us in audio form on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Spotify. If you like looking at our beautiful faces, you can watch us on YouTube. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, that little bell. That way you're notified every single time that we make a video. And we have a lot of diverse content that's coming. Continuing with I'll Say This, continuing with Chris and Company, continuing with the First Watch series. And if you're saying to yourself, look, I like this Castellani and I like his content, it's too bad there isn't a place where I can go and find both those things together. There is, okay? There is. So pick up the phone and start dialing and go to castellanicontent.com. No need for phones, actually. I'm quoting the Wolf of Wall Street, but go to castellanicontent.com. It is a beautifully put together, organized site in which you can find everything that we create, from post-game videos. You can find the links to our other socials, to Twitter. If you want to get caught up on all the Michigan basketball videos we've done, all the podcasts we've done, you can find it there in one space, one website to rule them all, one website to find them. I think is that the third pop culture reference I've made in this intro so far? I think that's a sign that we should get to the interviews. But yeah, we'll be back to conclude this thing. Appreciate all of you guys continuing to listen as we continue to roll out the interviews. And yeah, let's just jump right into it and get to our interview with Jeff Rieger. Jeff Rieger, 97.1, joins us today on the program. I feel like I always struggle with the early exchanging of pleasantries, so I don't want to, I want to jump right into it. But how are you doing, man? It's been a minute.
I'm fantastic, man. How you doing? I mean, other than it being frigid outside and it's like -1 and I'm sitting in my car and yeah, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I was going to say, this is our 42nd episode, the first time in which we've had a guest really battle the conditions like that. I mean, it's for people who are watching right now, it's roughly around 0 degrees in Michigan, depending on where you're at. So, I mean, this is a Herculean effort on your part.
You know what? Exactly. I'm all about the strength to go on here.
This is your Jordan flu game, and I appreciate it. So let's jump right into what has become kind of the big story of at least this time of year, which is it is February, almost late February, and we got Michigan basketball in the midst of a Big Ten championship race, potentially. Actually, as of right now, they're in first place. What's your surprise level at? I mean, did you expect any of this? Were you thinking that they had a potential to surprise some people, or did this come out of nowhere?
No, like I first of all, everybody blasts the transfer portal and NIL and oh my God, it's the worst thing in the world. And then you look at teams like Kansas State over and over and over building good teams, and Doug McDaniel's over there. Who knew?
Yeah,
I just realized that the other day. But no, you look at a team like that, and they continue to use the transfer portal, and I think it's here to stay in basketball. So when Dusty came over, I'm thinking to myself, all right, you know what? We heard about Vlad Golden. We got excited about Danny Wolf. Like, okay, how good can this team be in 1 year? And I saw a stat after they beat Ohio State. This is the best year-to-year turnaround in the 107-year history in Michigan basketball. Yeah. So it's insanely impressive. So I'm very impressed, and I'm very surprised because I didn't think you were going to be able to do this in 1 year. But the way they play, I still think they turn over the ball too much. I think you think of that. I still have anxiousness when they go to the free throw line.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, though, I mean, they won a lot of close games, and that's going to help them in March. And listen, I shouldn't do this to you or myself, but I have found myself thinking about deep runs in the NCAA tournament.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Which is stupid to do because it's been such a long time. But you know what? It means something to us. So absolutely.
You know, once you see it happen, and obviously we got the Trey Burke photo behind me. Once you see it happen, anytime you get into March, you think about it. And I think, but part of it's not just Michigan, but what we've also seen from MSU in this state, where it's like I've seen teams, you know, you kind of not back your way in, but you aren't particularly, you know, thought of as potentially being a contender. You find your way in the Final Four. I'm with you. I do think the free throw thing gets overlooked a little bit. They've nearly lost two or three games because of that. Purdue game very near. I mean, you know, Wolf missed those two right at the end. Braden Smith missed the half-court shot. That was huge.
By the way, I thought they were going to lose. I was convinced as soon as he missed those two free throws. I'm like, yeah, Michigan's losing this heartbreaker.
They did a great job defensively on that final possession of not letting him get to the rim and not fouling either. And he kind of led to him forcing up a half-court shot. So no, I'm with you. It's been a lot of fun. It's interesting because, you know, last year was so brutal. Oh. I remember I had a conversation with my dad when we brought in Dusty, and I liked the hire. In fact, one of my all-time good takes is that like last December, December 23, I tweeted that Dusty May was going to be Michigan's next head coach, and it ended up working out. But I was talking to him when this happened. He goes, they need about 10 players. And it's kind of what he got. I mean, they went out and they built this team. And I think that when you talk about the portal, and I think very often a lot of people just think it means you just got to go out and get players. And the fact is that's part of it, but it's more so you got to get a roster. You got to get a roster that makes sense. And I think that that's one of the issues that Juwan ran into, is that he just kind of went out and said, okay, this guy's talented, let's bring him in. Whereas by the time these guys got together on the floor, the spacing didn't make any sense. I mean, I think Dusty really knew what he was doing. There were people that raised a lot of eyebrows with bringing in 2 7-footers and having them start, you know, with each other. And he did a great job with the roster construction. And it's led to, obviously, this surprising campaign. Huge game coming up this Friday. Obviously, Michigan State, as of the time of this recording, hasn't played Purdue. But regardless of what happens in that game, Big Ten championship implications. Where do you stand on the Sparty team? Do you feel like this is the return of a golden age of Izzo, or do you think that there's still some issues that are plaguing them?
Okay, well, first of all, by the way, I looked at Juwan Howard as Alavila. I really did. Went out, got some pretty good talent, but could not develop them. They didn't play well for him. And I love Juwan. I still do for his Fab 5 days.
Me too.
But how that ended was very difficult to take. As far as Michigan State, listen, I will always, and I'm sure you will, and people watching, people around here, I will always think Izzo has it in him to get to the Final Four. Now, it's been forever. Mm-hmm. That 2019 team that beat Duke, the Kenny Goins shot, they beat Zion and RJ Barrett. That was the last team to go to the Final Four, if I'm not correct. I believe that's. Yeah, that was so it's been it's been a while, but I still have that mystique. Now, they're a deep basketball team, and they can't shoot to save their life. And I found it comical that Izzo was like, well, they're going to zone us? They're going to zone us after one game, after the Indiana game. And then that massive win at Illinois, I think the thing with Michigan State is they're so deep that on a different day, you get a different guy stepping up, which is tournament recipes. Like Jackson Kohler the other day at Illinois. They didn't allow a bucket in the last 8:29. Like I got Syracuse, Michigan State, like going to the Final Four vibes from like 2001. It was insane. So I do think they have the ability, like while they don't have an alpha male, while they don't have a top dog, I think they have a bunch of dudes that can rise to the moment. And that's what makes them really dangerous. I also think, and this might be a really bad comparison, so feel free to tell me to shut up.
Okay.
But I see Jace Richardson as a Tyson Walker type player. Not the same type of player by any means. Right. But I'm talking about the kid is so talented that I truly believe once he starts, he's not going to stop. And if you go back to Tyson Walker, we watched him play, and I remember because I hate Michigan State. I despise Michigan State. I always root for them to lose. I'm not afraid to say it. It's who I am. It's what I do. I don't know. For some reason, I decided to be a bigger Michigan basketball fan than Michigan football fan. But I watch Michigan State, and I hope nothing but the worst on them. But I'm so impressed and amazed by Tom Izzo. I always have been.
Yeah, same.
And if you go back to Tyson Walker 2 years ago, like this was a kid that did not take over. but you knew he was capable.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's possible that Jace Richardson's the exact same. You've seen flashes. I think that kid's going to be an absolute beast.
I'm with you. And we saw it against Oregon. And you are correct in the sense that, it's a good tournament formula to have, which is, they don't have a guy, but they have a lot of guys who can be the guy. And I think that obviously the Kohler performance was so huge against Illinois, not just, getting that win, but I think what it potentially means for teams who do decide to run a zone against them, getting a guy who's comfortable getting that middle touch and kind of knocking down those jumpers, I think can be huge. I'm with you. And I would say, as we're both Michigan fans, so we can relate to this, it's a trauma response because there's been Michigan State teams I just gave up on that found their way to the Elite Eight Final Four. So like I'm still, even 6 years removed from their last Final Four, still not counting them out. I think that the outside shooting is obviously a legitimate issue, but it's this weird thing that Izzo there's no coach in NCAA basketball history better at winning as a lower seed. So it's like these January or February bumps in the road drop them down a few seeds and weirdly makes them more dangerous come March. We've seen it a million times. Well, you brought up obviously this rivalry and the huge, probably the biggest Michigan home game with fans that we've seen in a long time coming up on Friday.
Oh, God.
Yes. Whether it's football or basketball, do you have a favorite win against Michigan State? One that comes to mind that was just so wholly satisfying?
Well, the one that really comes to mind is probably Appling getting the ball stolen from him. If you remember, God, that's going on, 10 years?
2013, baby. We're going 12, yeah.
Oh, my God. I mean, obviously, that was a special team, and Michigan made it all the way to the championship game. There was one year where Michigan beat them in the Big Ten, the tournament.
Yeah.
And it happened on a Saturday to get to the championship game. That was pretty remarkable and pretty satisfying. I go back further than you do. I'm an old bastard. I'm going to turn 50 this year. So I grew up with the Fab Five. Mm-hmm. And in 89, I was in 7th grade when they won it all in Seattle, right? Yeah. And then things went awful after the big controversy with C-Webb and the Fab Five. And Michigan sucked for, 20 years. Yeah. Meanwhile, Michigan State skyrocketed and they had the Flintstones and they went to Final Fours and they had Draymond Green and it was all agony for me. It was all absolutely. I remember to this day, you don't maybe, but remember Jamal Crawford?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I remember on a Tuesday night getting together with my buddy. We're going to watch the game, right? And I was thinking to myself, this is the first Michigan team that's actually decent. And I get to my buddy's house, and he's like, hey, JC's not playing. I'm like, what do you mean he's not playing? And I turn on the TV, and Dick Vitale's like, oh, baby, Jamal Crawford suspended for some ongoings with some Seattle businessman. And I'm like, oh, you got to be fucking kidding me. Come on. Like, it was always from the awful coaching decisions, like, Tommy Amaker stunk. Brian Ellerby was a train wreck. So it all turned around pretty much when Beeline got there. And John Beeline gave us, after about 5 years of struggling, some of the best moments of our lives as Michigan basketball fans. And that shot that you have behind you, I mean, the Trey Burke shot is one of the greatest moments of my life, Michigan basketball-wise. I remember where I was. It was on a Friday. They were down, 13 points with the last 3 minutes to go. And Burke hits it, goes to overtime. That was unbelievable. So it's been a while, I feel, since Michigan basketball and Michigan State both have had really good teams that maybe could make deep runs.
Yeah, no, they say it's the first time in a minute. And the ones you brought up in terms of most satisfying wins are pretty much in line with mine as well. The 2018 one that you brought up, the Big Ten tournament one, was so fun because that Michigan team they obviously went to the national championship, but they were not as nearly as hyped throughout the season as the 13 team was. And
they were fortunate too. They were fortunate in their tourney run, considering the path they got.
Oh yeah, no, and the Jordan Poole shot, and even before that, that was the year where there was so much hype for Michigan State. That was the Izzo's most talented team year with Cassius and Bridges and Jaren Jackson, and Michigan beat them in Breslin, I think in January, and there was just kind of this perception of this happens to State at some point every year. They'll meet each other again. And I think that was kind of the moment, even with the good fortune they got in the tournament, where people were like, man, this team could probably they can legitimately make a run. And I remember the next day they played Purdue, who was a higher seeded team than they were, at least in the Big Ten standings. And I remember being as confident as I've ever been Michigan was going to win that game. That was when John John Teskey came off the bench and went nuts, and they won their second straight Big Ten tournament. But yeah, no, I mean, it's one. I feel very nostalgic about that Beeline era because that was, 13, 14. That was my junior, senior years of high school. And that was at a time where the football team just wasn't that good. And not only were they not that good, they weren't that interesting. Like, at least, and I would prefer not to have these years back, but at least the Rich Rod years, like, you had some explosive athletes, you had Denard. Those defenses were so bad that it was almost fascinating at points. It was round peg. It was the round peg in a square hole era at Michigan, where Rich Rod was trying to do something that just probably was never going to work at a university like Michigan. And so to have kind of that outlet of this basketball team that was, with a coach that people liked and people thought highly of, but it sounds crazy to say now, Jeff, but there was a period where people were starting to wonder, is it ever going to happen at Michigan again? Like, are they ever going to get back to that point that they were? Yeah, that they were at with the Fab Five, and obviously with Fisher, where, I mean, they went, 13 was the year, they went 20 years without an appearance in the second weekend.
Chris, even worse than that, I started to wonder, do they even care? It's not about will they get back. Do they even care to hire the right guy? If they do, by mistake, sweet. But do they actually care? So to actually see Jawan get fired or resign, whatever it was, and then for them to go out and they got themselves a pretty good basketball coach. And the only thing I hate right now, and I'm sure you're going through it too, I do hate every time you put on social media anything positive about Michigan. Oh, Dusty May is going to be in Bloomington next year. I mean, just can I have this? Can you just shut the fuck up? Can I just have this? Just let me enjoy this. And then if he happens to leave in May, that's fine. It is what it is. If that's his dream job, then so be it. But please stop.
I don't. The thing is, and people have asked me about it, and I've talked about it, and I think Dusty's an incredibly smart guy, and I thought the answer that he gave after their win in Bloomington was very diplomatic because I think it's two things. One, they've had a great season. He's going to get a nice contract bump. Like, he's going to make a little bit more money in Ann Arbor to make sure that they keep him around. And two, and I don't have any problem with this, I think there's a certain ego thing involved where he just likes the idea of getting on the phone with Indiana and saying no. That has to be so satisfying. Like, hey, you could have had me at any point. Now I'm at another school in the Big Ten. I would be very surprised if he finds his way out, because I think that they're going to do it right. And I'm with you. I mean, you talk about, if they hire the right guy by accident. I feel like that's kind of what happened with Beeline, where he was he was, nobody thought Beeline was a hack or a bad coach. I mean, he'd been coaching basketball forever when Michigan hired him. But I think that there was kind of this belief at the time of, like, we just got to get back to the tournaments. We're not thinking about Final Fours. We're not thinking about second weekends. Like, just have a program that every few years is being competitive. And I think really it was that 2011 team that they had that made it to the second round that was, I think, projected to finish last in the Big Ten. They ended up, sweeping Michigan State. They had a pretty good season. And then after that, I feel like this, as a program, like as a university, they started caring again because Chrysler got renovated and started to see kind of like the upgrades again. And so I always look back very fondly on this era, and hopefully I'll look back fondly on this current era as well. I want to transition a little bit to I guess what would be my fastball, no pun intended, which is obviously Tiger baseball, as they find themselves in I think as good a position organizationally as they've been in a minute in terms of where the culture's at, where the front office is at, obviously with the players they have coming back. But I want to just kind of put a post-mortem on this Alex Bregman saga, because I came away from this not relieved, but saying to myself, look, man, they offered the guy a very competitive offer. He didn't take it. And now I kind of find myself looking at the roster and saying, well, small sample size for Jahen last year, small sample size for Jace Young. Wenzel's going to get better. Riley's going to get better. Is that me? Because I do this with the Tigers more than any other team. Is that me thinking with my heart, or do you feel like this really was a missed opportunity in free agency for them to upgrade?
All right. So I actually have a question for you before I answer.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Can somebody explain to me, you or anybody else? I saw the Evan Petzold story the other day, and I apparently saw that Bregman was interested. So he, of course, went back to the Tigers and said, like, hey, I'll come here for this. So he either wanted $7 and $200 million, or he wanted $6 and $184 with an opt-out after the first year. And allegedly the sticking point was the opt-out after the first year. Why would that be a sticking point? If you're the Tigers, why wouldn't you want to give that opt-out? Because if he's great, sweet. Maybe it's a Matt Chapman situation where you end up signing him long-term yourself. Or if he leaves, then okay, you're not going to get the bad Alex Bregman years. I don't understand why you wouldn't give him the opt-out after the first year. Even in the other contract that we heard about when Bregman signed with Boston, it was an opt-out from the Tigers after year 2. I don't get the opt-out after year 1 would have been my first move. Like, sweet, here you go.
Yes, I think the downside with that is, and it's the downside that comes with opt-outs, is what happens if they're bad? Then you're stuck with them for 5 more years. I mean, that's exactly what's happened with Hobby, where it's like you gave him an opt-out after 2 years, which I felt like was kind of a cheap out anyway, because if he was good, he would have left. He has not been good. You're stuck with him for what is now 3 more years left on his deal. So it's a very boom or bust thing. I was surprised reading that as well. And I felt like, they 7,200. I'm not going 7,200.
No, that's ridiculous. But yeah. my point was, if you gave him the opt-out and he wanted to opt out, sweet. It would have sucked to lose him after a good year. But if he did opt out, that means you're not on the hook for years 5 and 6 of his contract. It was just weird to me. As far as the actual situation, though, I would have loved him here. And I know people fell out of love with him. I totally get it. I know he took his sweet time. I counted the days. It was 101 days from when free agency started to when he finally decided to be a Red Sox. To me, and I'm the only person I think that believes this, and you can laugh at me, and many people do, I don't think he wanted to play at Comerica.
I did a whole segment about this. Yeah, no, I'm
really okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I truly believe, and it's not because Comerica is unfair. It's a neutral ballpark, and Rob, you have a couple homers, of course, but I truly believe, and I know this for a fact, like I don't know many things, but from years of covering baseball, people have a stigma about Comerica Park.
They do.
Whether it's Nick, whether it's Victor, whether it's Miggy, whether it's Juan Gonzalez. Robbie Grossman one time came into Comerica and said, listen, opposing hitters hate coming here because we get robbed. So I don't care. Like, and then people are like, oh, stop it. It's a fair ballpark. It doesn't matter if it's a fair ballpark. All that matters is what Alex Bregman thinks. And I do believe the reputation is that Comerica is going to rob you out of a lot of offense. So I do think that played a factor. I would have loved him here. And I was willing to take the chance that years 5 and 6 would suck, because that's the cost of doing business. Because I'm a believer that if you're truly ready to win right now, let's go win. And you don't have a right-handed bat. You don't have a third baseman. Now we talk ourselves into believing that Veerling's going to be okay, or that Young's going to be okay, or Ibanez is going to be okay. I think they missed out. Now, I don't blame Scott Harris. I don't, because at some point you got to say, no, enough is enough. But if it truly was 6 and 184 and an opt-out after 1 year, I would have done it in a heartbeat. So I do think it's a big miss. And I know a lot of people are not with me.
It's so tough, because I try to, and I've fallen victim of this many times, where I sometimes judge this current regime as if the previous regime is still in place. Like, I feel like if this was 2020 or 2019,
thank God they're not.
Right, exactly, right. If this is 2019, I'd be furious, because in that era, we never developed players for shit. So it was just going to be another year of these guys that you knew were nothings, another year of the Dawalugos of the world. I have so much more faith. Oh, dude, I mean, I could do my Tigers group chat. Sometimes we just go do deep dives of like obscure Tigers from the Avila era that bombed out. I mean, you got Dawalugos, your Sergio Alcantaras, you got the Franklin Perez's who never even made it to the big leagues. I mean, it was a mess. But I do believe it has been we've seen a huge step forward in regards to player development here.
I agree.
Which does give me hope of like, okay, trying to look at it optimistically, which for a long time we had every right not to be optimistic. What happens if, the players I threw out there, Malloy, Young, do get better? I am with you, because my whole thing coming into this offseason is I want to have a really good team in 25. That's my whole thing. And what is frustrating is I still think they will. Like, I like the Flaherty signing. I think their pitching is going to be a nightmare for everybody. I think it's one of the best staffs in the sport. On a smaller level, I like the Glaber deal. But I think that from an outsider's perspective, whether you're a casual baseball fan or just a casual Tiger fan, I think it won't be until they sign that big contract. I don't know what that is, whether it's 150 million, 200 million, where people are really going to start to get, the casuals are going to start to get super invested.
Right.
I just think that's kind of how it works in sports. We're attached to stars. Now, we benefit from the fact that, like, we have the best pitcher in baseball who's a star, and he just happens to be a guy that they developed. I mean, they deserve credit for that. But yeah, I know, I'm with you. What is sad, and talk about a sad statistic, they have the highest payroll in the division right here. I mean, and
which better mean you win the division,
right? Exactly. No, now there's expectations, and that's the whole. Yeah. Now that's the whole thing, though, and I hate doing this, it's like defending them this way because I think it's such a cop out, but. Nobody else in the division's done shit either. I mean, the Royals have made a few moves. They re-signed Waka. They went out and got Estevez in bullpen, but the Twins are doing nothing. The Guardians, to me, went backwards. I mean, the Naylor trade, it was almost
Jimenez too. I don't quite understand it.
They're trying to do, and I hate this just in principle, like this Rays model of sell high with your good players and then get prospects back. And then when those guys age out, I think that's lame. I think it's kind of, I would argue it's bad for the sport because you grow attached to players, and now Naylor's gone. And so, yeah, I mean, we'll see. I'm with you as a whole about the overall saga. It's a weird thing because, yes, I soured on him too, but I also know it's going to be May 1st and Torque's going to leave the bases loaded, and I'm going to be saying to myself, we should fucking sign Bregman. We should just sign Bregman. Like, it happens every year.
The funny thing too, though, is, and I'm totally with you, I do wonder, though, considering, like, the Royals did spend last year, to be fair, right? So, like, they went out, they spent $100 million or whatever it was, and they ended up getting a good team, made the playoffs, lost. But with that all being said, I could see this going the other way too. I don't want to be negative, but I could see the offense lacking yet again. And that's the one thing that would drive me bonkers. If you're going out there and you're losing 3-2 games, if you're going out there and you're losing by 2 runs, like we saw so much last year. So they got to hit. Just please, I agree with you. They're going to pitch. And I think Fetter will work wonders as he has, and their bullpen looks pretty impressive. But they better hit, because at the end of the day, nobody's going to care about this team if they can't hit.
Right. No, you're correct. And it's so funny. Obviously, I love Skubal and I'm so happy for what he did, but it's so funny that he won the Triple Crown last year because he was the only pitcher we ever got runs for a majority of the season. Like, there was that stretch in the early part of the year. Reese Olson, he was like 0-6 with a sub-2 ERA. I mean, he was like Mets DeGrom for a minute, where it's just like,
no run support.
No run support, can't buy a win. And that was and Skubal was the only one who didn't like suffer from that. But everybody else, I mean, Flaherty didn't get his first win till close to Memorial Day. I mean, these guys were pitching great. And I know, I think it's the way the offense is built right now, and it's going to be similar to how it was last year. Is I think there's good pieces here. Like, there was a period of time where they just had no good hitters. I don't agree. I don't think that's the case anymore. Riley's
I agree.
Vierling can slap the ball. I think there's guys that can play roles for this team, like Perez. I just think that what is severely lacking is that 90 RBI thump in the middle of the lineup. I guess it depends if it's a righty carries that guy, and I think that's what AJ's plan is like between the carry Justin Henry Malloy platoon, that there could be 35 home runs between the two of those guys. I understand kind of trying to moneyball your way through it. I still think sometimes it's kind of cheap, and ultimately, and I hate to bash the guy again, but it is true. The way that we view the entire team, especially the offense, in this offseason being what it's been, was so predicated on Torkelson's struggles a year ago. I mean, I don't even know if they think about getting Bregman if Torque hits 35 home runs last year. I think that was the middle of the lineup thump that you wanted, and they haven't got it, and they've kind of had to pivot. And what you're left with is a team that has good players, but is lacking in that solid run producer role in the middle of your lineup. So
I'm sure, just be relaxed about it. I'm sure Torque is watching a video as we speak.
Yeah, I remember he unfollowed me on Twitter a few years ago. I think.
I can't imagine why.
I might have been too critical, so I apologize, Spencer. I'm rooting for you, but yeah.
No, you are right about Torque, though. I follow you on the social medias. I understand. He is maybe the least clutch player I've ever seen in my entire life. And it's sad because he's had massive opportunity to come through. The other thing I wonder about with this team, and I was just actually talking about it today with a buddy, the Baez saga is hysterical because as many of the moves as you pointed out, and I think it's been a positive offseason, not a great offseason, but positive. They're making strides. They should contend, get back to the playoffs, hopefully. But if they throw Baez out there in that first series against the Dodgers and Wincio Perez happens to be the casualty and he doesn't make this team, I'm going to lose and you're going to lose and we're all going to lose our mind. And they will tell everybody they're not serious about winning. And I do wonder, they'll tell the fan base, they'll tell their own team. And I'm sure you saw the AJ cut the other day, or his quote, "Oh, Javi's awesome and they love him." No, they don't. Like, I'm sure they think he's a nice guy, and he is a nice guy. I've talked to him many times. You telling me that Riley Green or Parker Meadows or Colt Keith isn't looking at a guy like Baez who can go up there and do whatever he wants, and they have to obviously worry about the strike zone. They have to get good competitive at-bats. Meanwhile, Javi just goes up there and it doesn't matter, and yet he still gets paid $26 million a year. Like, I get it's his money regardless, but you got to get rid of him. And if they don't, I do believe we start the season having no faith in this team.
Yes, I have a lot to say about that because Javi, even despite the fact this team had a historical run last year and we had the best pitcher in baseball, I still get more questions about Javi Baez than any other player on this team. He is, I'm not even going to call him polarizing because he's not, that would imply
he sucks.
You're right. He's not good, right? He's not
let's call it what it is. Nice guy. I mean,
for sure. And my whole argument with him from the beginning, and I'm going to go back to Miggy as an example here, where Miggy's last 7 years, he was an ineffective player. I mean, he was a negative WAR player. My whole argument was, and AJ even talked about this, and I agree with him, Miggy added things to that team that you didn't always see because at the end of the day, what was lacking was the body. His knees weren't working anymore. He couldn't really lift the ball anymore. But Miguel Cabrera forever had a Hall of Fame approach.
Of course.
Watching Miguel Cabrera at bats would make guys better. I really do think that he embraced that role towards the end of his career. And while he wasn't hitting even 20 home runs anymore, I think that having him on the team, in the dugout, in the lineup made a huge difference. Javi Baez is the antithesis of that because if you're getting 1, 2, 3 pitch at bats and you got a guy who's going to be chasing pitches, you're not making anybody better. And that's why I said I don't think it was a pure coincidence that they went 38-11 when he was out last year. And you don't
I think it was 24-10 the stretch after they kicked them off after the Chicago game against the Cubs. Mm-hmm. And I looked it up because I had some caller. I was talking about this on the radio the other day, and some caller, I'm like, listen, you got to get rid of Javi or you're not serious, blah, blah, blah. And some ticket texter came in and he's like, hey, a-hole, what were they with Javi? So I'm like, okay, well, let me look. Well, they were 40-40 with Javi. He had 183 with like a 509 OPS. Yeah. So, I mean, enough is enough. Here's the thing, and you're right about Miggy, but I also think with Miggy, the teams were so bad towards the end. That's all you had. That's all you had. So there's no reason to get rid of him. There's no reason to buy him out because if you did, he's just one less body around. And at least that last year was fun and him getting 3,000 hits and 500. I mean, that was fun, right? So like all that was fantastic. But that made sense to me. This makes no sense. You're trying to win the division. You're trying to get back to the playoffs. You are screwing yourself by keeping this guy in the team. Yeah, and you're making a point that I made really even the last 2 years, which is prior to last season, a bad team is going to be willing to stick with a bad contract. Because let's say you take Javi off the roster in 22, right? They're still a 90 loss team. Like it's really no difference. And honestly, at that point, you're splitting hairs. So you're not playing competitive baseball anyway. Now that you have a team that's competing, and not only that, you have a shortstop in Trey Sweeney who wasn't great, but was fucking Barry Larkin by comparison when based on what really, I mean, his numbers were so pedestrian. And I was getting tweets and DMs from people being like, I love Sweeney. Sweeney's the man. I can't love watching this guy just because the comparison was such a refreshing thing to see this young player. Yeah, I am interested because I do think that there is a leash. I can't imagine this thing ends with him just playing out the remainder of his contract. For one, performance-wise, it can't. Somebody asked me, what's it going to take? Well, he was the worst hitter in baseball last year. So he's going to have to be worse than the worst hitter in baseball. And then, so I don't know exactly what it'll be. My guess, and I could be very wrong about this, is I could see him and Sweeney platoon pissing him off at some point. And I don't know. I don't think it will, though. I think he's totally fine with just being there and doing whatever they tell him to do. I mean, there's a belief that maybe this hip surgery is the end of him. And if you got to go back to the IL, then maybe there's some kind of insurance that kicks in. So some of the insurance would pick up the cost of what is owed on his contract. And maybe the Tigers end up spending less money. So I get it from that standpoint. But I saw Evan Woodbury, who does a nice job covering the Tigers from MLive. He predicted his starters and his lineup the other day. And he's around the team. He's in Florida right now. He knows just as much, more than anybody else. And he predicts Javi makes the team. Yeah. And he predicts Winsale Perez is left off the team. So, if that's the case, then what are we doing here? Yeah. You are not practicing anything that you preach. You preach dominate the strike zone. He's the furthest thing from dominating the strike zone. So the other thing too is I truly believe like this team, and you know this, AJ is a wizard when it comes to his flexibility and his matchup and his pitching chaos and blah, blah, blah. This team pinch hits for everybody, not named Riley Green or Parker Meadows. So you're telling me that Javi taking up a roster spot isn't going to affect this team negatively? Of course it is. Like, you need that roster spot. So I got to tell you, like, this is a deal breaker for me. Like, I want to believe it's different. I want to believe in Scott Harris. But if this man is on the team, if he breaks camp with them, I can't do it, dude. I just can't do it.
I was getting asked a question about this. Somebody asked me the other night, he goes, between McKinstry, Ibanez, Malloy, and Perez, which guy is left off the team? And I just said, well, the obvious answer is, like, you just don't bring back Javi. And the fact is, I think that is, I brought it up with, fans not buying in till, what's that?
Sorry about that.
Oh, okay. I was just making sure you're good. I've talked about it with fans not really buying in until, they spend big in free agency. But, you bring up Wenzel Perez. I understand the offense was limited last year, but they made the playoffs and they batted him third, like, consistently. So
and he had some big time hits too.
Yeah, no, he was one of the clutchest hitters in baseball, legitimately, like in high leverage. So you're at that point saying that a guy goes from batting third in the postseason to, being replaced by a guy who was statistically the worst offensive player in baseball. Yeah, I'm with you. I do think that there will be a breaking point. I just don't know exactly when it's going to be. And I think ultimately, and you brought it up as well with the versatility and the way that AJ kind of mixes and matches, to me, the value of an Ibanez or a McKinstry or a Perez, the guys that you can move around the diamond, adds so much more than a guy who plays short. And I mean, I guess you could put him at second if you wanted to. I don't think he wants to go there, but who knows? But no, I mean, we'll see. He's one of the more. He's the last vestige to me of what is that bygone era of, like, he's the last hanger on of the Avila era to me.
It needs to be bygone. It needs to be gone. Like,
yes, you're right. Exactly.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I could see it like it was yesterday. Chris Ilitch, the rebuild is over. Here's Eduardo Rodriguez. Here's Javi Baez, and it's been a disaster. And the funny thing is, they should not allow this to affect them with other free agents in the future.
Absolutely, yes.
With that being said, they got to do the right thing here. This was not Scott Harris's call. This wasn't his guy. You now got a Pobo that you apparently love, so trust him, and let's get it going. I also think, and maybe I'm wrong about this, like, I believe this might sound controversial, I believe Chris Ilitch actually will spend on guys. I believe Chris Ilitch probably said, like, go get Bregman if you want Bregman. And I think that was a Harris call not to go as high as he did, but I mean, hell, he still went higher than anybody else. Right. So I actually think Chris would want to get rid of Javi. So it's got to be an insurance thing, or they're not this dumb.
Yeah, I know. And I'm with you. That's why the Bregman saga, I actually came away somewhat relieved, because I said this on my other show, I didn't want a repeat of the Correa thing, where I felt like Correa to Detroit was such a perfect match. I think that AJ wanted it to happen. I think that Carlos would have been totally down with it happening. And I felt like, they gave him an offer that was kind of near the lockout was going on, and I felt like they weren't as aggressive as they could have been. When I saw 6-172 for Bregman, yeah, he said no, but, like, somebody will say yes to that. And if that person ends up being a Riley Green extension or a Kerry Carpenter extension, I don't want to get into it, because I think the Skubal thing is a completely different animal with the level he's pitching at and the Boris factor in there. Like, I don't know if they'll spend that money, and I don't want to jump into it yet because it just depresses people. But
I know it does. But one quick word, if I may.
Yeah.
Is it? Be honest with me. I know he's your guy. I see the poster behind you. If they decided he's not worth that insane money, considering he had arm injuries, considering he's a pitcher in Major League Baseball that gets you about 6 innings these days, considering they're an organization that develops pitchers actually quite successfully.
Yes.
I'm not convinced. We heard the Evan Petzold report that they gave him an uncompetitive offer. I'm not convinced Scott Harris wants him. I'm not convinced the organization is willing to spend that on him, considering he's a stud, he's awesome, he's fantastic, but he's a pitcher in this day and age. It's not like he's vintage JV that goes out there and throws 120 pitches and gets you 9 innings. Right. I mean, has Skubal ever topped? Has he had a complete game? I'm not being negative. It's just this day and age with pitchers.
He had 1 8-inning start against Boston last year. That was his career high.
Yeah.
So. Which in fairness falls in line with all other pitchers today. It's not like,
100%.
yeah, he's not an outlier there. My perspective on that is I don't know if they know if they want him long term.
Yeah, that's fair.
The fact is, and it's where Boris sometimes thrives and where Boris sometimes falls apart is he talks about all of his clients like they are at the top of their game. And when you have Juan Soto, that works. But when you have a situation like Pete Alonso, to me is a prime example where Alonso still is going to drive in runs. He's not 2019 Alonso anymore. And people weren't going to spend on him like he was 2019 Alonso. With Skubal, if we get 2 years from now, and the numbers I'm sure will still be very good, but we're seeing strikeout rate go down, fastball velo go down, and some sort of indicator that maybe he's peaked, then I think we start to have a different discussion about this. I think it's something similar kind of happened to Corbin Burns, who ended up getting a lucrative deal, obviously, from the Diamondbacks. But Corbin Burns' strikeout rate, velo on that cutter, down compared to where it was when he won the Cy Young. I mean, pitchers it's a weird day and age. You are correct about pitching development with the Tigers, and I hate to put it all on this guy, but because you never know. If Job is like that dude, if his stuff is that explosive and good, I think it completely changes the dynamic there and kind of softens the potential blow about losing Skubal. We'll see, and it's a lot of pressure to put on a 20-year-old, but I think where they're at right now, that's the one area that I have no concern about in the organization is how they develop pitching and just the pitching department in general. I mean, the amount of guys that they've found who were either afterthoughts or nothings that they've turned into really solid pitchers, whether it's starters or out of the bullpen. That gives me a lot of confidence.
I agree. Well, real quick, I do think, and I think you were one of these people, correct me if I'm wrong, that last summer it was all trade Skubal radio. I mean, that carried us for a very long time. And I know some people were disgusted by it. I know other people agreed with it. But you know where this is heading. If they don't compete this year,
yes,
you're going to have that exact same topic. And people are going to be like, do you trade Tarik Skubal now with just 1 year left on his deal after this year, but still 2 playoff appearances potentially?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll take it one step further and say if they have and I hate this, but I know how the business works. If they have a terrible first half, we're talking potentially a deadline move. Because one thing that a lot of things that a lot of teams have failed on in the past is if you have a top tier player, you often don't get back as much as you want if he's only got 1 year left on his deal. Now, 1.5, where you can give him 2 runs, 2 potentially deep playoff runs as a pitcher, that's a little bit different. So if they were going to think about making that move, I mean, ideal world, they're competitive, which I think they will be, and we won't have to worry about that. But yeah, no, I mean, it was my whole thing last year that drove me nuts about that is there have been instances in the past, Matthew Boyd, I remember being the prime example, where it's like, look, maybe you like the guy. Yeah, right. Maybe you like the guy, maybe you don't. The fact is, those teams were so far away from being competitive that even if this guy would have stayed here and pitched at a Cy Young level for 4 or 5 years, it wouldn't have mattered. You're still talking about a team that's on the decline. The way I felt with Skubal last year is like I don't think the team is far away enough for you to make the move on a guy who's going to have 2 full years left on his deal. Now, ultimately, I didn't expect that they'd make the playoffs. We were proven to be more correct than we thought we were in that particular instance. And that was one of the cool things about last year is like we don't have to hear they wasted a Cy Young season or a Triple Crown season. He pitched in the playoffs, pitched great in the playoffs. Like that was all awesome. Now, I want to just ask because you've obviously been around the Tigers for a long time, and I want to go back. I'm not going to call it the glory days, but I always loved the dynamic you had with Ausmus, and the fact that I don't, and I think you've done a wonderful job. There was one time I got to give you a shout out for this, by the way. I know I'm all over the place. There was a few years ago. It was 22 when the offense was not scoring runs, and I said, "Can somebody please ask AJ if he's embarrassed?" And you actually did it. I remember you doing. I remember giving you a shout out, and being like, "Hey, appreciate you doing that." So you've always, never been afraid to ask the hard questions. At the same time, the way that your relationship with him works. It was like that one chill teacher who has that one student that just gets under his skin. And I felt like that was kind of the case with the way that you would ask him questions, which from my perspective, I thought was completely fair. If you could, did you, when the cameras were off, did you have a relationship with Ausmus at the time? Did you feel like he was frustrated with you even beyond just kind of the media relationship?
No, I actually didn't. I think, believe it or not, Ausmus was a great guy. And
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So he is a great guy. The funny thing is, back when Fox Sports Detroit, and I guess they still do it now, Bally's, or whatever it's called, FanDuel, when they televised the post-game press conferences, my mother used to get so upset because she thought Brad Ausmus treated me awful. And she used to call Brad Ausmus Asmus. I mean, this is like a 80-year-old Jewish lady that like is ripping on Brad Ausmus because he, like most people, drove her crazy.
Yeah.
So but believe it or not, like we were totally cool. Now I wouldn't say I had a relationship with him, but like he never was upset at the questions I asked. I remember one time I went to spring training and he yelled at the top of his lungs. He's like, "Oh, here comes the panic peddler, Jeff Rieger," something to that extent. So I don't think he ever took it like, wow, this guy's being a dick, or wow, this guy's being like, I think other media members, like, why are you asking these questions? But I don't think Brad ever took it that seriously. And I think Brad's biggest fault was like, he thought he was one of the players. Like, I don't think he was ever actually a manager. I don't think the players took his authority very seriously. But overall, we were totally fine. I actually remember years after, and he was with the Angels, I want to say.
Yeah.
And they came to Comerica, and me and Stoney were talking to Ausmus before the game, and it was totally fine. So I don't think we ever had a bad relationship. Same thing with Leland. I mean, I used to piss Leland off constantly. And at the end of the day, like I was at the winter meetings one year, and my dad had passed away, and Jim Leland came up to me, gave me a big hug, and he's like, "Jeff, I'm so sorry to hear about your father." So like, I actually think they kind of respected the questions, and the questions just came from you guys. Like I always thought, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but everybody has their own agenda. Like, so a writer from MLB.com has a different agenda than a writer from the Freep, than Bally's or FanDuel does. My agenda has always been like, hey, dude, like ask the questions that people actually want to know about. Right. And at times it's gotten me in trouble, but I still think that's probably the best way to go.
What's the most pissed you've seen somebody be at you? Whether it's Tigers, any Michigan, whatever.
Well, there's a couple. I pissed off Leland one time. I never forget it. So Rick Porcello was in Pittsburgh, and I was doing a 4-hour radio show. And it was on a Sunday after the Tigers won like 4-0, and Porcello went 8 strong. Yeah. And it was like 4-0, maybe it was 3-0. And I'll never forget it. Leland yanked him out of the game. So like, okay, it's the middle of the summer. I'm doing 4 hours on a Sunday. So I bring up the question, wouldn't you love to see Porcello get the complete game chance? I mean, he was at like 100 pitches. Maybe. Yeah. So I asked the question, full phone lines. It killed, right? People had thoughts. The great thing about baseball, people love managing decisions and closer decisions. That's what baseball is great for. So the next day, I go into Leland's office, and he's lying on his couch. He's got his shirt off. He's got his Tiger hat on. He's smoking a cigarette. And I go to him. I'm like, Jim, are you ever amazed at the amount of second guessing that you get? And if you want to go look this up, this is an MLive article. Chris Iott at the time wrote it up. So the transcript's out there. So he looks at me. He's like, you're one of those fucking radio guys, aren't you? and I'm like, yeah. And he started to yell at me because how dare anybody second guess him? And I think he dropped the line, I manage for the fans, but not with the fans. So I just kept pressing him a little bit. Like, Jim, like, obviously, dude, like, I get what you're saying, but what do you say to the fans that wanted you to allow Porcello to finish the game, allow, like, a moment to happen? And he just continued to get more pissed and more pissed, and he got red in his face, and he started swearing, and I remained calm the entire time, and it really pissed him off. And it was so much that I eventually had to have a one-on-one meeting with the guy. And I walked in there, I had a meeting with him, and everything was fine. And that was that. But like, that was probably one of the moments. The other moment that popped in my mind is, I got a great story about Mike Babcock.
Okay.
Mike Babcock, like years and years and years ago, Mike Babcock, as you probably know, not a very friendly man. I mean,
no, not particularly popular nowadays either.
Right. Yes. Ask Toronto people what they think of Babcock.
Right.
But there was one back in the day, we used to take Babcock's post-game press conference live. So I would go down there. I had a wired microphone. So at the time, I'm waiting for our station to come back from commercial. Wings had lost 4 in a row. They just lost 4-0 to the St. Louis Blues. So Babcock's talking. We're in commercial. And I'm like, fuck, we're in commercial. Like, he's talking. I know he's pissed. He's going to be short. So finally we come back and they're like, all right, let's go to the Jeff Rieger with Mike Babcock. He's finishing up his comments. And I'm like, yeah, Mike, I know you've already been asked this. I get you've already been asked this, but your thoughts about the effort tonight. And he's like, I'm pretty sure I already discussed that. And he walked away. So it was 10 seconds of live radio of him blowing me off. So I'm like, all right, Ken Kale, that was Mike Babcock, back to you. So afterwards, I'm like, great, that was awful. So I go to PR. I'm like, hey, can you just tell Mike what happened there? Do you mind? The next day, I go to practice, and I got a recorder around my neck, and my biggest regret is that I never hit record. Mm-hmm. Mike Babcock walks up to me, and he's like, you want to go talk? And I'm like, yeah, let's go talk. So he goes into his office, right? And he's sitting there, and I'm sitting there, and one of the PR guys come in, and he's like, you guys good? And Babcock's like, what are you doing in here? It's not like I'm going to fucking kill the guy. Or something like that, right? And he looks at me and he says that, and I'm like, oh boy. Yeah. All right. And then he just goes on to say, like, listen, if you want a one-on-one, I'll give you a one-on-one like somebody like in Saskatoon that I did it with. But I don't know why you feel the need to ask more questions than anybody else. I don't know why you feel the need to always ask the final question. And I'm like, Mike, I don't need to ask any questions. I'm just trying to do my job here. So we finally got done. I shook his hand. I go in the Wings locker room, and Chris Osgood actually called me over. And he saw what happened the day before, and he's like, dude, he gets paid millions of dollars to speak to the media. People leave the Wings game early to listen to what Mike Babcock has to say. I can't believe he did that to you. So the whole time I'm lurking, I'm like, is Babcock around? Is he going to come back here? So those are probably my two big run-ins with various coaches.
It varies per person. Where I think you brought it up with Ausmus, and I think it's the case. I've noticed it with a lot of baseball people. Is there is this respect as well? Where like Leland was the ultimate to me. Where Leland was like a movie character baseball manager, where he'd get pissed, he'd yell, he'd smoke cigarettes, but they win, he'd cry, heart of gold type of thing. I mean, it was always interesting to watch. Have you had? I mean, he's much more tight-lipped, but have you enjoyed your experiences with AJ up to this point?
AJ's totally different.
Yeah.
I don't know AJ. I mean, I know him from just like asking questions. But Jim, the difference between Jim and AJ is Leland would take you in his office, and it was the coolest thing in the world. Before the games back then, every game, you would sit in his office. They don't do it at the office anymore. They do it at a podium. Yeah. And he would just talk baseball to you for 30 minutes. And I can't tell you how many times I went out of there. I'm like, wow, I had no idea what went into that. Or I had no idea you had to think that way. Or I learned so much from listening to Jim Leland. And Jim Leland believed you shouldn't even be allowed to ask a question as a reporter unless you watched a year of baseball games and went to games and just listened without opening your mouth. Right. He was old school. He would sit there with his cigarette. He would answer any question. Sometimes he'd make fun of reporters. A lot of the times he gave us something because he knew he was hiding something in his clubhouse. So when he would give us something, and I used to always report it back to Mike and Terry at the time, I can't tell you how many times I sent stuff back to them. You guys will never believe what Leland said. And it always killed, and it made their show. It was fantastic. But I think Jim did that understanding that if I tell you something, you're not going to go in my clubhouse. And he had so many stars back then. And I'm sure there was all kinds of turmoil. And we would never know about it because he was brilliant that way. AJ goes to the podium before the game, after the game. Brilliant dude. Answers every question. Very respectful. Seems like a very good dude. But I don't know him. I just don't. And I don't think the reporters know him either. I think he separates the baseball from everything else. It's also weird with AJ. You can't talk to Chris Fetter. You can't talk. I know. He just doesn't allow it.
Yeah. It's not just Fett either. I think it's the entire coaching staff. He's got that.
No, you're right about that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not Fetter exclusive. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's I was fortunate enough to we did about an hour-long interview before opening day last year. But I think in general, the entire front office, this entire regime is like that, where it's very cards close to the chest, very tight-lipped.
Yes.
And I mean, he doesn't flake on it. AJ gives you enough in these post-game pressers where you can write stuff, where you can talk about
question.
it. I mean, he's not, but he knows the game. And I mean, he's an incredibly, I love listening to him just talk about the sport as a whole. If he, I hope he manages here forever, but he'll be a great analyst at one time if he wants to be. And you can tell he comes from a scouting background just with the way that he breaks down the game. So, yeah, no, he's the man. Two more questions. One, we're going to switch gears a little bit. Going to talk Michigan football here because I asked Stoney this question a few weeks back. And I think I'm going to continue to do this with my Michigan people and take a poll over time. But one game sample size head to head, 1997 Michigan versus 2023 Michigan football. Who wins?
Is Connor Stallions there?
Let's say post. This is post. I'm trying to think of what game it was, but this is pre-Penn State 2023 Michigan. So it's post Stallions time.
Oh God! Wow. I'm just thinking about both teams, right? And I think about the competition that they played. Like Michigan last year, they had the three big games, whether it be Penn State, Ohio State, and then, of course, well, I guess 4 with their playoff, right? Yeah. So, like, I always lacked, like, God, I wish they would play a more substantive team. Like, the 97 Michigan team, I thought their schedule was tougher.
It was.
I mean, you got Charles Woodson. That's a great question. I think I'd probably go 97 simply because, A, I think they played tougher competition. B, I think at the end of the day, they probably had more talent. But maybe you can't say that because Michigan had 11 dudes that got drafted, right?
That defense, man. That 23 defense was something else.
That 23 defense. And, it never got the credit that it deserved. Like, I remember going into that final game against Washington thinking, like, wow, these NFL soon-to-be receivers and Michael Penix are going to tear them up. Yeah. And it was the furthest thing from the truth. So, well, that is a fantastic question. I'm going to go 97 by a smidge. I always would have loved if they played Nebraska to see who would have won that game back then. I mean, what were you, like 10?
My friend, I was 2 years old. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
I don't want to age you. I'm sorry.
Do I look that bad, Jeff? Jeez.
God, no. I did not give you, I was not prepared for that. I don't think I gave you a great answer. I keep thinking in my head, like, I don't know. I just think the level of competition back then was better. So maybe I'm going to go them. But damn, this team that we just saw play that went 15-0 was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And they rocked everybody in games that you didn't think they were going to. I mean, and look at what they. Maybe I'm in the minority. I actually think the Connor Stallions scandal emboldened them. I think it empowered them. I actually think they played better with losing Jim Harbaugh, as crazy as that sounds. I think it brought them together. I think it was them truly against the world. And it was the one team, they didn't care about NIL. It didn't seem like they didn't care about transferring. It was just winning a national title. And I think it's rare that you see that. So I'm going to change my mind 5 different times. That's a great question. What'd Stoney say?
Stoney leaned 97, but he also admitted there's a Jansen bias involved in that. He acknowledged that stylistically they were kind of similar teams where they, and that's just what Michigan football is. They're going to wear you down. They both had really good offensive lines. He gave the offensive line edge to 97. And both teams had elite defenses, and obviously the best player was on 97 with what Woodson was able to bring. And I mean, that's to kind of have that magic, that magic wand there that you can bring in at any point probably changes the dynamic. I strongly argued for the 23 team just because I think it is harder to play defense in the modern age of football in 2023 than it was in 1997. I think and the fact that defense never ever got fucking penalized. I mean, they never got called for PI. They never got called for offsides. I mean, they were as disciplined a team as there was in the country. And I think the performances in the playoff games are what pushed me over the edge. Because you're right. Penix had that ridiculous year. You were concerned coming into that game with him. And
I was.
And we all were. And 13 points. I mean, they scored 1 touchdown and just against an offensive line that won the Joe Moore Award and beat them up. That's my lasting image with that team, so I kind of give the edge to 23. But go ahead.
I mean, just to be fair, though, and you're absolutely right. But and I would never do this. But again, when you argue for one side, sometimes you end up diminishing the other side.
Right.
When you look at the teams they played in the playoffs, that Bama team was not vintage Bama.
Correct.
And it was almost a surprise they were in it to begin with.
Yes.
And that Washington team was probably not the caliber of the 2 teams that were just in the national title game, whether it be Notre Dame or Ohio State.
I would agree.
So I think that maybe sides with the 97 team a little bit, but I hear you. I hear you. My big problem last year with the team was simply that they had 8-9 games of just like, cool, they're winning by 45.
Yeah, I know.
And that was great, but it was hard to really fall in love or take that team super serious until they did it, and they deserve all the credit in the world for it.
It was fun to me just because there were boat racing teams, and yet you were getting this kind of narrative of, they haven't played anybody, which was true really for a lot of the season. And then you go to Penn State and you dominate.
That was huge.
Yeah, that was I think really kind of the moment where I'm like, this might end up being the last team standing, because that was an impressive. That was off with Harbaugh getting suspended off the plane and everything. Yeah, no, it's weird because you play more games nowadays in college football, and you're the conference expansion and everything, but that 97 team, I think that is the big advantage for people that favor them. That was the hardest schedule in the country that year coming into the season. Like, they were a projected 3-4 loss team. They opened against a top 10 team at home against Colorado. So the one kind of downside is the split natty, and that's just the age. Right. That's not their fault. It's not Nebraska's fault. It's just the way that things were arranged. Then we'll never exactly know, was Michigan even the best team in college football in 97? That's just.
And you might not remember this. I'm sure you heard about it, though. I mean, you were 2, so you don't remember this. But Missouri losing that game to Nebraska, or on the kick, which was bullshit. And then Tom Osborne's last year. So of course they get there. It would have been so fascinating to watch them play. And of course, instead you get years and years of stupid jokes from Michigan State and Ohio State fans. Like, oh, it's a split natty, dude.
Yeah.
So
that's
a great question, though.
Thank you. And a split natty, and then this one is the Connor Stallions thing. So I don't know what the next national championship excuse is going to be. I don't know. Performance enhancing drugs, maybe. We'll see what happens. But okay, last question here, because I'm always curious about this when it comes to just the mood of the Detroit sports fan, because we've seen it evolve so much over the last several decades, and I think there was a period of time, and you were in the thick of it, probably 4 or 5 year stretch, where none of these teams were good. I mean,
no.
The Lions were expectedly awful. Tigers were rebuilding. The Red Wings had taken steps back, and the Pistons haven't really been, this is the most competitive they've been in a long time. We are out of that dark age now. And I think the Lions have had a great run. We can forget the Commanders game for half a second. The Pistons are back in competition. Tigers made the playoffs. But we've experienced a lot of heartbreak. Do you feel like Detroit sports fans are more or less cynical than they were when you first started doing radio here?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
Okay, I can tell you, I've become more cynical.
Fair.
I think that's the job. I actually, believe it or not, when I started radio, I was a massive, massive, massive fan of everything Detroit sports. And now I find myself, and this sounds awful, but if given the choice of a great storyline or a win, sometimes I'll take the great storyline because I know people will be chomping at the bit to talk about it. So I think it kind of goes with the business. I think fans are less cynical because of the Detroit Lions.
Yep, that was my pick as well.
I would say probably the fact that 3 really good seasons, 2 where you make the playoffs. Even with what happened this year, I think they're less cynical because if the one team that we've always thought would never bring us any joy, we thought we'd all be dead before they go to the Super Bowl. And maybe that still happens. I have no idea.
Still on the table. Yeah.
I mean, it really is. I mean, God, maybe my daughter gets to see a Super Bowl. Right. I don't know. But the one team that we never expected anything out of because they've always kicked us in the nuts, for them to do what they've done in 2 years, I do believe fans are less cynical. Now, it's gone weird, though, because 2 things I don't understand, and maybe your generation is responsible for this, so maybe you can answer it.
Okay.
The number one thing is I don't get these Lions fans that all of a sudden are like, oh my God, I can't watch the Super Bowl now. I can't watch the Super Bowl. I'm like, they don't want a playoff game. So I do think, and maybe I'm wrong about this, I think there's 2 types of Lions fans. I think there's the older Lions fans like myself that have been through all the shit and the hell and the torture. And I think there's newer Lions fans, whether they're younger or never paid attention before. And those are the fans that are now taking the losses really tough, considering it's been nothing but winning for the last couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. I think I always kind of push back against this because in general, fans are going to be more, you're going to see more fans when the team is competitive. Like
100%. Yes.
Yeah. And so there's going to be a louder kind of vocal minority. As in general, as a fan of sports, there has never been a time, and we've experienced some heartbreakers, in which one of my teams lost a game, and then I said, I can't watch that sport the next day.
Right.
I'm too obsessive with it. And that doesn't mean I was invested. Like, I wasn't on the edge of my seat for this year's Super Bowl. I mean, who was, given the way that it played out? But it's
awful.
Yeah, right. But at the same time, I think with this year's Lions, I get it a bit more, because there was, and I said it on my other show, and it's, it sucks. There was throughout the year, with the amount of bounce back they had from adversity, the amount of America wins, the amount of dominant wins, there was that feeling this year of like, this is the 2016 Cubs. This is the 2004 Red Sox. This is the team that is finding a way every single week to get it done. And this is all going to culminate with them winning a Super Bowl. So I can understand and then they laid an egg. So I understand the heartbreak and the frustration that comes with that. You are correct, though. And I think it's just one of those things. This is where I think the age that I've grown up on affects me. I have seen the Tigers be on the precipice of championships. Right. I have seen them multiple times have the best team in baseball, be the favorite in the World Series and lose. In 2013, they were the best team in the league and got lost in a series that they out-hit Boston, out-pitched Boston, everything, right? And so that hardens you, because those are your formative years. So that's in my head now of like, that's how close I've seen them be that close. Whereas somebody who came up in the Avila era, if all you know is sucking, it's not going to hurt as bad when the team like gets good and starts losing in the postseason, because they're exceeding the expectations from when you were at a certain age. With the Lions, and I think you're like this as well, we've just grown up on them being so bad that to see, like, if it was in a lot of other situations, blowing a 17-point lead in the NFC Championship, while not feeling good, like, I think there's some people it doesn't hit as hard, because we've seen 0-16, we've seen a million top 5 picks, we've seen, the Mayhew era, we've seen the Quintricia era. So there is kind of a certain amount of bliss that comes with the current regime of like, they're probably going to be competitive for a long time, which is something they've never been able to sustain.
That's all people want. That's all people really want. Like that. Right. This is everybody's fantasy. Like, we love and look, you love the Tigers more than probably anybody else. Yeah. But we love baseball, hockey, basketball. We love it all. But we love this more than anything. Yes. So the fact that we're finally in the mix, people talk about us. People have Super Bowl odds for us. I mean, yes, I understand the fandom. I found the I'm not over it feeling just a bit weird. I mean, I heard Stoney this morning on the radio. He's filling in for Costa. He's like, are you over the Washington game? I'm like, what do you mean I'm not over it? It's a month ago, for crying out loud. Like, yeah, it sucked. There was 5 turnovers, but like, it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it is, but at the same time, like, there's, I'd be lying to you if like, I scrolled, made sure to scroll fast on my TikTok feed when the trouble with the snap play came up. It's just like there are those. I can't be overly critical in that instance, because like I still fast forward if the Poppy Grand Slam comes up on TV at some point. Like, there's just those certain ones that get under you, and I think this year in particular, it felt so right throughout the entire year that to kind of slam into that wall was what sucked. But you've always been good to me, man. I'm surprised I haven't had you on at least on this show before, because I mean I've known you 2016, 2017, the early days of the Tiger videos. Always been very supportive of what I do. I've always been a good egg, man. Yeah, I appreciate the heck out of you, man. I've met you, I've met your family. You've always been a sweet dude. So yeah, man, I'll be hit me up if you're in Detroit this year. If you're not, hounding AJ for questions late and just taking in a game, let's check something out. But always appreciate you taking the time, and we'll have you on again soon. Maybe I don't know. Michigan makes the Final Four. We'll. Oh
yes. What's the saying? From your mouth to God's ears? Is that what people say? Let's go with that. I like that.
Exactly.
No, you listen. I must tell you. Your Tiger videos, like when you first started them, phenomenal. I love your Michigan basketball breakdowns as well, but your Tiger videos were much watched because you were speaking for a tremendous amount of fans that were so frustrated with such a god-awful product. Yeah. So nicely done, my friend. Nicely done.
Thank you. It was an accident. I picked a perfect time to start doing them because it was 2017 was the first year they popped off, and that really was the moment where we not only realized this team is bad, but they're going to stay bad for a while. And the frustration that came with that, because that was the deadline, or, they had the waiver wire as well, of Martinez being gone and Upton being gone and Verlander being gone, and us in the moment looking at the returns for these deals being like, Avila might be asleep at the wheel, and that scared you. I mean, you brought up earlier about how Juwan to you was like Al Avila. I can't. He to me is what Avila would have been, except we didn't give Juwan the extension that we gave Avila. That was the thing. Is we knew Avila was incompetent, and we went out in the middle of 2019. Here's 3 more years. I still have no hard feelings. Not saying you do. I still have no hard feelings toward Juwan because they got rid of him and they moved on when the time was right. They didn't wait. I don't either. Yeah, they didn't wait 2 or 3 extra years knowing full well that this wasn't working like they did with Avila. But obviously, yeah, we could talk about that stuff all day. We'll reconvene at some point. But thanks for doing the show, man. And I'll talk to you.
Absolutely, man. Take care.
Yep, thank you. Jeff's the man. Always been super supportive of what I've done, and obviously that's continued. And look, I don't want to self-gloss too much, but I've known Rieger for a minute. I've known several of these guys in the media, known of them for quite a while, and to be able to graduate to a point where we're doing a show like this, at least from my perspective, it shows a lot of growth. And if there's one thing that, I definitely have to do more of, it's probably growing up. But I knew he'd be great. Always been a really chill guy. Always been very supportive of people that are just trying to find their footing. So appreciate him being on the show and talking sports. It's what we do, and we're going to continue to mix it up a little bit. But I think that we're at a time where we're not quite into baseball season yet, so we're very close. But down the pike here, I do want to really kind of rev the engine as we get closer to baseball season. Maybe getting a few guests back that we've had on about a year ago at this time. We're talking maybe a Justin Henry Malloy, maybe a Jackson Jobe. Not trying to pressure anybody, but I thought I liked the way those interviews went last time, and Tiger season's my bread and butter. We got to capitalize on it. So that's all fine and dandy. Look, if you like this show, you can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify in audio form. Audio. I said with a T that time. Audio. No, it's audio. CastellaniContent.com. There you'll find everything that you need regarding Chris Castellani content that Austin and I are creating. And obviously, shout out to Austin, who continues to work his butt off behind the scenes with the production stuff. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to spend a ton of time recapping or saying the things I've already said, but the process is there. I think that we have a really good formula right now with the stuff that we're putting out. Love doing the interviews. Love the way we've kind of mixed up our content over the last year, and that's going to continue, you guys. I think it's about being in a good place personally, and it's about being in a good place with content. I think we're there with both those things right now. I absolutely appreciate all the continued support. I've looked at things, it's been a minute since I kind of did a deep dive, but there's been an upward trajectory. And, that was scary for a while because you never know how many people are going to stay around. You guys have stuck around. I really appreciate that. And of course, I appreciate Jeff joining the program today. So I will be back here. I don't know if we'll have First Watch this week. Austin's still finishing up that video, but we got plenty more things coming. Michigan basketball post games, huge Michigan basketball game coming up this Friday against the Spartans. So you can look forward to that. Thank you very much, guys. Have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness.
It's an unfair game. We got to think differently.